This was totally predictable. That is what Beto O'Rourke said today when he provided the only unpredictable moment in the unfolding story of mass murder at a Texas elementary school. The mass murder that occurred yesterday was predictable. We just couldn't tell you the exact location it was going to occur or the exact day it was going to occur. It is now predictable that a virtually identical shooting will occur again in Texas and other states. What has been said in the aftermath has also been totally predictable. But Beto O'Rourke's crashing the news conference chaired today by Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott was not predictable. Beto O'Rourke went to that news conference in Uvalde, Texas, to listen and then to tell Greg Abbott and other Republican elected officials on the stage, quote, "This is on you."
Don't play this stuff.
The next shooting is right now, and you're doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue.
This is on you until you choose to do something about it. That is what Beto O'Rourke said to the governor and to the other elected Republicans on the stage while Beto O'Rourke was being shouted down by the Republican mayor of Uvalde, Don McLaughlin, a sometimes guest on Tucker Carlson's Fox show. Beto O'Rourke was in New York yesterday, and he was booked to appear on this program in this studio with me last night. But as soon as the news broke about the shooting in Texas, Beto O'Rourke rushed to the airport and flew back to Texas, suspending campaign events. His opponent, Governor Greg Abbott, did not suspend campaign events after he knew that 19 children and 2 teachers had been murdered in Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Governor Greg Abbott held a fundraising party while the parents of those dead children were heard screaming at the local civic center when they were told that the DNA samples they submitted matched the DNA samples of a murdered child. Those screams from those parents were coming from inside the Civic Center and could be heard by reporters outside the building. Those screams were not heard by Greg Abbott at his fundraiser that he was enjoying at the same time those screams were being heard. Senator Rafael Cruz has 2 daughters, one in high school, one in elementary school. But he knows he doesn't have to worry about what happens when they go to school, because they don't go to a public school in Texas. They go to a high-priced private school where these things do not happen. America is the country where you can always buy your way out of any problem. And Senator Cruz has bought his way out of worrying about what happens when his girls go off to school. Senator Cruz had nothing to say today, playing his part as an extra, standing behind Governor Abbott at the press conference. Yesterday, Senator Cruz explained exactly how to prevent school shootings like this. He said, "We know from past experience that the most effective tool for keeping kids safe is arm law enforcement on the campus." That is the Cruz solution. That is the Texas Republican solution to school shootings. Cops on campus to shoot and kill any mass murderers who show up at a school. Keep that Texas solution, that Texas Republican solution in mind as you listen to Republican Governor Abbott describe what happened.
The first thing that happened was that the gunman shot his grandmother in the face. She then contacted police. The gunman fled, and as he was fleeing, had an accident just outside of the elementary school, and he ran into the school. Officers with the Consolidated Independent School District, they approached the gunman and engaged with the gunman at that time. The gunman then entered a back door and went down 2 short hallways and then into a classroom on the left-hand side.
You hear that? Officers approached the gunman and engaged with the gunman. And after that, the gunman entered the back door of the school. Those officers had guns. Engaged with the gunman means very likely that they shot at the gunman. Didn't work. According to Senator Cruz, the whole thing is supposed to be over right there, right on that spot. Those officers are supposed to have no problem shooting and killing the moving target of the gunman running into a school. But the Cruz plan, the Republican plan, the Republican solution did not work. Multiple armed officers could not stop the gunman from entering a school and running down a hallway.
The gun room entered into that classroom, and the classroom was connected internally to another classroom. Border Patrol, Consolidated ISD officers, police, sheriffs, and DPS officers converged on that classroom, and a Border Patrol officer killed the gunman.
Everything that the governor just described there took approximately an hour. We have new reporting at this hour that it was actually four Border Patrol officers who shot at the gunman, fired at the gunman. It took 4 of them firing at the gunman. They do not know which one of them fired the bullet that hit the gunman. But that's how many it took. 4. In addition to the 2 officers who couldn't stop the gunman from getting into the school. The gunman was barricaded in a classroom where he did all of his killing. And he had about an hour to do it because the Cruz plan, the Republican plan, did not work. The Republican plan to protect children and teachers in public schools did not work and does not work. Senator Cruz said yesterday, we know from past experience that the most effective tool for keeping kids safe is armed law enforcement on the campus. And in fact, we know from past experience and yesterday's experience that armed law enforcement on the campus does not work, did not work. There was armed law enforcement on the campus of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And that did nothing. That law enforcement officer did nothing to stop 17 people from being murdered at that high school. The American Republican elected officials posing in that press conference today, those Texas Republican officials posing there, said that mental health is the problem. You just have to get mental health under control and there will be no more school shootings. That is the other Republican solution. And that one was completely contradicted on the spot, unwittingly, by Governor Abbott himself.
There was no known mental health history of the gunman.
And Governor Abbott also said there was no meaningful forewarning of this crime. And that was what provoked Beto O'Rourke to say to Governor Abbott, this was totally predictable. Governor Abbott described a series of posts on Facebook by the gunman beginning 30 minutes before he reached the school.
The first post was to the point of, he said, I'm going to shoot my grandmother. The second post was, I shot my grandmother. The third post, maybe less than 15 minutes before arriving at the school, was, I'm going to shoot an elementary school.
The 18-year-old murderer used an AR-15, the favorite murder weapon of America's mass murderers. It is the single most important tool in making America's mass murderers the best equipped mass murderers in the world. And today, When that Republican press conference in Uvalde, Texas was over, America's mass murderers were still guaranteed by those politicians on the stage and by the Republican Party that the Republican Party will do everything that the Republican Party can possibly do to continue to make America's mass murderers the very best equipped mass murderers in the world. All of our mass murderers can have all the AR-15s they want as far as the Republican Party is concerned. As soon as this mass murderer turned 18, on the very day he turned 18, he legally went out and bought himself an AR-15 because Governor Greg Abbott wanted him to be able to do that. And after he bought that one, he bought another one. And every elected Republican standing on that stage today wanted that 18-year-old to be able to buy as many AR-15s as he wanted to the day that he became 18. He entered the school with 7 30-round magazines, which Democrats want to make illegal. High-capacity magazines. Democrats want to make those illegal. 210 bullets. That's what the murderer carried into that school, 210 bullets. And if the supremely brave Border Patrol officers who ran toward the sound of his gun, of the murderer's gun, did not reach him as soon as they did, that murderer was capable of killing 210 children in that school because Greg Abbott and Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn and the rest of the Republican Party in Texas wants everyone in Texas to be able to buy high-capacity magazines, including whenever they are contemplating shooting their grandmothers in the face and murdering as many kids as possible in an elementary school. The Republican Party wants them to be able to buy whatever they need to do that. As long as they haven't committed a felony, and as long as they don't have documented mental health problems registered with legal authorities, then Texas Republicans want everyone 18 years old or older in Texas to be able to attach as many 30-round magazines as they want to their brand new AR-15s. This is an American way of death supported by an American political party whose values on life and death are not shared by any other political party on the planet. It wasn't always this way. The rapper who goes by the pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly carries a passport with the name of Colson Baker on it. He took his stage name from Machine Gun Kelly, a famous gangster of the 1930s, whose real name was George Kelly Barnes. When the machine gun and sawed-off shotgun became the preferred weapon of gangsters like Machine Gun Kelly and John Dillinger, Congress, with bipartisan support, had no problem effectively outlawing machine guns and sawed-off shotguns in 1934. It seemed like the right thing to do. Congress could think of no reason why gangsters should be able to get Thompson submachine guns, which were developed for the Army as a weapon of war. Republicans supported outlawing machine guns. Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the bill into law, 1934. Richard Nixon was the most right-wing Republican president of the 20th century when he was elected in 1968. He appointed Warren Burger as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Warren Burger was a lifelong Republican from Minnesota who supported Republican Dwight Eisenhower's presidential campaign. Earl Warren served in President Eisenhower's Justice Department before President Eisenhower appointed him a federal appeals court judge in Washington, D.C., and it was from that position that Richard Nixon elevated Warren Burger to be the highest-ranking Republican-appointed judge in the land, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And 5 years after he retired from the Supreme Court, lifelong Republican Warren Burger said this in 1991.
If I were writing the Bill of Rights now, there wouldn't be any such thing as the Second Amendment.
Which says?
That a well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of the state, that people's rights to bear arms. This has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. Now just look at those words. There are only 3 lines to that amendment. A well-regulated militia. If the militia, which was going to be the state army, was going to be well-regulated, why shouldn't 16 and 17 and 18 or any other age persons be regulated in the use of arms, the way an automobile is regulated?
Fraud. The Republican Party has fully embraced a fraudulent interpretation of the Second Amendment to mean that the founders of this country intended for every 18-year-old in Texas and everyone older than that to be able to buy a 21st century version of a machine gun, an AR-15, and nothing can be done to restrict that right in any way. None of the founders believed anything like that.
Evil swept across Uvalde yesterday. Anyone who shoots his grandmother in the face has to have evil in his heart. But it is far more evil for someone to gun down little kids.
How evil is it to legally enable an 18-year-old to shoot his grandmother in the face? Is it evil to enable that 18-year-old to shoot and kill 19 children in their classroom along with both of their teachers? How evil is it to make sure that America's mass murderers can buy AR-15 assault weapons whenever they want to, attach high-capacity magazines to them, and carry as many extra high-capacity magazines as they can with them so that they may kill as many people as possible in the fastest possible time? How evil is that? Did evil sweep across the Texas legislature when they passed those laws and made sure that an 18-year-old could do all of that yesterday? Did evil sweep across Greg Abbott's hand as he was signing the law that allowed that 18-year-old to do what he did in that school yesterday? The official Republican Party position tonight is, as it has been for many years now, America's mass murderers must be, absolutely must be, the best equipped mass murderers in the world, and the rest of us must live with or die with that unchangeable fact. The Republican Party position is those kids in Texas had to die because the Constitution says they have to die. The Republican Party is wrong.
Do you want a solution? Stop selling AR-15s in the state of Texas. You want a solution? Have universal background checks. We don't have them. You want a solution? Red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders, which stop a shooting before it happens. You want a solution? Safe storage laws. Those are 4 solutions that have been brought up by the people of Texas. Each one of those has broad bipartisan support right now. We could get that done if we had a governor who cared more about the people of Texas than he does his own political career or his fealty to the NRA. And if you need any proof of that, check the schedule for the NRA's convention this Friday right here in the state of Texas.
That was Beto O'Rourke noting that scheduled to speak at the National Rifle Association's convention in Houston, Texas this weekend are Donald Trump, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and Texas Senator Rafael Cruz.